There is a moment in some relationships that doesn't look dramatic. No shouting, no slammed doors, no final argument. It looks like calm, but it is not peace. It is the quiet moment when someone who has loved too deeply, listened too long and carried too much, finally puts the weight down. And when that person is an empath, that moment is not loud, it is invisible, but it is final. Today, I want to talk about that silent moment, the moment an empath detaches forever, and why most relationships don't end with anger, they end with emotional exhaustion. An empath does not leave when they are angry, they leave when they are empty. They stay long after respect is broken, long after conversations become one-sided, long after their needs are labeled too much. They stay because they understand pain. They see the wounded child inside their partner. They excuse what should never be excused. They translate neglect into stress, coldness into fear, absence into they're doing their best. An empath doesn't measure love by what they receive. They measure it by how much they can endure. But the nervous system keeps score. The body remembers every dismissed feeling, every interrupted sentence. Every night they cried quietly so they wouldn't be a burden. Every time they shrank themselves to protect someone else's comfort. At first they speak gently, carefully, with patience. They say, "This hurts." They say, "I need you." They say, "Please see me." If nothing changes, they speak again and again until one day they stop, not because they no longer care, but because their heart has learned something painful. That explaining your pain to someone who benefits from your silence only deepens the wound. Detachment does not happen in one day. It is a slow emotional withdrawal, a quiet closing of doors inside the chest. They begin to answer shorter. They stop sharing their inner world. They no longer argue, not because things are better, but because they no longer believe they will be understood. And this is the moment most partners misunderstand. They think the empath has calmed down, but what has really happened is grief has finished its work. The bond is already loosening because when an empath stops fighting for connection, they are already grieving the relationship while still inside it. By the time they leave, they are not heartbroken, they are tired, and tiredness is more final than anger. Let's tell how an empath detaches forever. Fars tell why. They detach after being emotionally unheard for too long. They do not detach the first time they are ignored. They do not detach the first time their feelings are misunderstood, or brushed aside, or answered with silence. At first, they explain themselves softly. They choose their words carefully, the way someone does when they are afraid of being too much. They try to translate their pain into something easier to digest. They say it in calmer tones. They make it smaller, kinder, less demanding. Not because the pain is small, but because they do not want to lose the connection. An empath learns early in life that love is fragile, that being fully honest can be dangerous, so they become skilled at carrying discomfort quietly. They become experts at sensing the moods of others, adjusting themselves, bending, softening, waiting for the right moment to speak. And when they finally do speak, it is not impulsive, it is measured, thoughtful, gentle. They say, "I feel lonely even when we are together." They say, "Something in me is getting tired." They say, "I don't need perfection, I just need presence." But presence is rare. What they receive instead are distractions, explanations, defensiveness, advice when they needed understanding, logic when they needed tenderness, solutions when they needed to be held emotionally. So they try again. They change their words, they change their timing, they change their tone. They start asking in ways that sound less like needs and more like apologies. And slowly, something painful forms inside them, not anger, but doubt. The doubt sounds like this: maybe I'm asking for too much. Maybe I'm too sensitive. Maybe this is what love looks like. Each time their feelings land in empty space, something inside their chest tightens, not dramatically, quietly. Like a door closing one small inch at a time, their nervous system begins to learn a lesson their mind does not want to accept. That closeness is unsafe, that vulnerability is unanswered, that reaching out leads to emptiness. And so they begin to pull their emotions back, not to punish, not to manipulate, but to survive. They stop sharing the small details of their inner world. They stop describing their fears in full sentences. They stop saying "this hurts" and start saying "it's fine." But because it is fine, because being unseen hurts more than being alone. They grow quieter in ways that are easy to miss. They laugh but not deeply. They listen but without opening themselves. They stay, but they are no longer fully there. Inside, something sacred is being protected. Because when a heart realizes that its voice does not change anything, it chooses silence not as a strategy but as shelter. And by the time they are visibly distant, by the time their partner finally notices the quiet, the detachment has already happened. It did not happen in one moment. It happened in 1,000 moments of speaking and not being met. And Sikod, they stop explaining their pain. They don't stop explaining their pain because they suddenly became cold. They stop because something inside them finally understands what their mind has been trying not to accept, that in this relationship, their truth has no home. At the beginning, an empath explains with hope, not the loud kind of hope, not the Nava kind, a quiet hope, the hope that if they can just say it the right way, softly enough, clearly enough, gently enough, then the other person will finally see them. They believe connection is one honest conversation away. They believe love means you can speak your hurt and be met with care. So they try. They don't just say, "You hurt me." They bring context. They bring empathy. They bring fairness. They say, "I know you're stressed. I know you didn't mean it, but this thing keeps happening and it's breaking something in me." They even protect the other person while they're bleeding. They wrap their pain in politeness so it won't feel like an accusation, and still they don't feel met. Maybe they get a blank stare. Maybe they get silence. Maybe they get defensiveness, "I'm the bad guy now." Maybe they get a quick apology that changes nothing. Maybe they get logic, "That's not what happened." Maybe they get blame, "You're too sensitive." Maybe they get avoidance, "Can we not do this right now?" To the outside world, these are small reactions, normal reactions, human reactions. But to an empath's nervous system, repeated over time, they become a message. Not a message spoken out loud, but a message that settles in the body. Your feelings are inconvenient here. Your pain is not safe to bring. Your needs will be treated like problems. Your emotions will cost you closeness. So the empath learns to edit. At first they explain less intensely. They remove the bigger words. They shorten the story. They avoid the deeper truth because they can feel how quickly the room turns cold when they go there. They become a translator of their own heart, trying to make their feelings acceptable to someone who has not learned how to sit with feelings. Then they start explaining in ways that are more careful than honest. They add disclaimers. "I'm not saying you're wrong." They soften everything. It's not a big deal. They turn pain into jokes. They turn needs into hints. They turn "I'm drowning" into "I'm a little tired." And something tragic happens in this stage. They begin to doubt themselves. Because if every time you speak your hurt you are met with dismissal or defensiveness, you start to wonder if the hurt is real. You start to wonder if your inner world is valid. You start to wonder if you are asking for something unreasonable. When all you are asking for is basic emotional presence, this is how self-abandonment begins, not by leaving the relationship, but by leaving yourself. The empath starts to notice that explaining their pain doesn't bring intimacy, it brings tension. It doesn't bring care, it brings conflict. It doesn't lead to repair, it leads to being misunderstood again. And for someone who feels deeply, being misunderstood is not a simple annoyance, it's an emotional wound. Because what they are really saying underneath every explanation is, "Please hold me emotionally." When that request is repeatedly unmet, the body starts protecting itself. They stop explaining because explaining becomes a form of exposure. It becomes standing emotionally naked in front of someone who keeps turning away. And after enough times, their system says, "No more." Not as a decision, as a survival response. You see, an empath doesn't fear conflict as much as they fear emotional loneliness. They can handle hard conversations. They can handle discomfort. What they cannot keep handling is the feeling of reaching out with their truth and touching nothing. So they become quiet. But this quiet is not peace. It is withdrawal. It is emotional conservation. It is the heart saying, "I cannot afford to keep bleeding in front of someone who keeps stepping over the blood." They stop explaining their pain, and instead they begin to observe. They begin to watch patterns. They begin to listen differently, not to be understood, but to understand what is actually true about the relationship. They notice that when they are sad, the other person becomes irritated. When they are anxious, the other person disappears. When they need reassurance, they are treated like a burden. When they speak about their needs, they are met with defensiveness instead of curiosity. And slowly, their hope dies, not dramatically, not loudly, quietly, like a candle losing oxygen. This is the part many people don't understand. The empath's silence is not the absence of feelings. It is the result of too many feelings having nowhere to go. Their love didn't vanish. Their energy did. Their willingness did. Their belief that their inner world matters to you did. Because explaining your pain over and over is a form of reaching. And when reaching repeatedly leads to emptiness, the nervous system learns to stop reaching. So they stop talking. They still do things. They still show up. They still care in practical ways, but they stop offering you the most intimate thing they have, their vulnerable truth. They keep it inside now, not to punish you, to protect what's left of them. And this is the invisible turning point, because once an empath stops explaining, they are no longer trying to repair the bond. They are no longer investing in being known. They are quietly preparing to live without needing you emotionally. They become calmer because they have stopped expecting. They become quieter because they have stopped hoping. They become polite because they have stopped fighting. And the relationship may continue for a while after that, sometimes for months, sometimes for years. But something essential has already ended, because the opposite of love is not hatred, it is disconnection. And when an empath stops explaining their pain, it's often because they finally realize a heartbreaking truth. That being understood should not require begging. That intimacy should not require performing your pain perfectly. That love is not someone staying in the same room with you. Love is someone staying emotionally present when your heart is trembling, so they stop explaining. And in that silence, they begin to leave, slowly, quietly, from the inside out. Oni mar tai gais tat, their body shuts down before their words do. Their body shuts down before their words do, because the body is more honest than language. Words can keep going for a long time. Words can pretend. Words can negotiate. Words can smooth things over, make excuses, keep the peace, protect the image of the relationship. Words can say, I'm fine, even when something inside is collapsing, but the body doesn't play those games. The body is built for survival, and when it learns, through repetition, that connection is unreliable, that tenderness is inconsistent, that closeness comes with pain or dismissal, it starts to protect you long before you consciously decide to leave. At first, the shutdown is subtle. They still talk, but their voice has less warmth in it. They still text back, but not with the same presence. They still listen, but the listening is thinner, like they're physically there while something inside is far away. Their smiles don't reach as deep. Their eyes stop searching your face for reassurance. Their laughter becomes polite. Their touch becomes brief, functional, almost careful. Not because they don't love, but because their system no longer trusts that love will be met safely. You see, when an empath has been emotionally overextended for too long, the nervous system begins to conserve energy the way the body conserves blood after a wound. It limits exposure. It reduces vulnerability. It turns the volume down on feeling because feeling has become costly. And the partner often misreads this. They think, oh good, they've stopped complaining. They think they're calmer now. They think the problem is gone. But calm can also be a sign of collapse. There is a kind of peace that comes from safety, and there is a kind of stillness that comes from giving up. The body feels the difference even if the mind doesn't want to admit it. When a person has tried repeatedly to connect and has been met with defensiveness, withdrawal, mockery, coldness, or indifference, the body starts scanning for danger. Not dramatic danger, but emotional danger. The danger of being made to feel foolish for having needs. The danger of being too open and too exposed. The danger of reaching out and finding no one there. So the empath system does what it has learned to do. It shuts down the openness. It becomes harder for them to cry in front of you, harder to share thoughts without filtering, harder to feel desire, not because desire is gone, but because the nervous system cannot relax enough to want intimacy with someone who doesn't feel emotionally safe. Sometimes their chest feels tight, like there's a weight sitting there whenever they try to talk about feelings. Their stomach knots when they think about starting that conversation again. They might feel tired all the time, even if they're sleeping. Their body becomes heavy, as if carrying the relationship is literal weight. You can be lying next to them, and they can feel alone. That loneliness is not just emotional, it is physiological, because connection isn't just a concept. It's a body experience, it's regulated breathing, it's a relaxed belly, it's a softened jaw, it's a sense that you can exhale and still be loved. When that isn't present, the body stays braced, and you can't stay braced forever without consequences, so the body begins to choose numbness over pain. Numbness looks like being less reactive, less expressive, less available. It looks like shorter answers, delayed responses, quiet compliance. It can even look like kindness, because they don't want conflict while inside they are disappearing. They might still say, "It's okay," but their shoulders are tense. They might still say, "Don't worry," but their eyes aren't with you. They might still say, "I love you," but the words sound like they're coming from memory rather than from the present moment. This is not manipulation. It is the body's intelligence. It is the system saying, "If I stay open here, I will keep getting hurt." So it closes. And here's the most painful part. The empath often doesn't even realize the shutdown is happening until it's advanced. They think they're just tired. They think they're just stressed. They think they're becoming more mature because they're not reacting. But what's actually happening is that their emotional capacity to engage is shrinking. Because every time they had a need and felt punished for it, their body learned a rule: need leads to danger. Every time they expressed sadness and were met with irritation, their body learned that sadness costs connection. Every time they wanted reassurance and were told they're too much, their body learned vulnerability leads to shame. And shame is one of the strongest signals the nervous system uses to shut down. Not because the person is weak, but because shame tells the system it is not safe to be seen. So the body withdraws first. It stops leaning in, it stops reaching, it stops hoping. By the time their words stop, their body has already been gone for a while. That is why the breakup feels sudden to the other person, because the other person is tracking words and events. But the empath has been tracking sensations for months. The tightness, the dread, the fatigue, the emptiness, the emotional loneliness, the sense of bracing themselves every time they speak. And eventually the body makes a decision before the mind does. It says, "I can't do this anymore." Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly, like a switch being turned off. They may still sit at the dinner table with you, still answer your calls, still show up in the routine of the relationship, but their body is no longer offering you their full presence. And when the body stops offering presence, love becomes performance, it becomes duty, it becomes habit, it becomes survival. So yes, their body shuts down before their words do, because the body does not wait for a final conversation to know what is true. The body knows long before the mind is ready to face it, that you cannot heal in the same place you keep abandoning yourself, that you cannot keep opening your heart where it keeps being left unattended. And when the body finally closes that door, the words, sooner or later, simply follow. And they grieve the relationship while still inside it. They grieve the relationship while still inside it because their love doesn't switch off in a single moment. It fades the way a tree dies, slowly, quietly, from the inside outward long before it falls. From the outside, it can look like they're still there. They still show up. They still reply. They still do the normal things that couples do: plans, routines, conversations about practical life. But on the inside, something has begun that most people never see: the private mourning of a bond that is no longer nourishing them. Because when an empath realizes they are not truly being met, they don't immediately leave. They try to fix it. They try to understand it. They try to love harder. They look for the reason. They ask themselves, what am I missing? How can I explain this better? If I become more patient, more supportive, less emotional, will the connection finally return? And every time they try and the pattern stays the same, another small piece of hope breaks. Grief isn't only about death. Grief is about the loss of what we believed would be. It's about the slow recognition that the future we imagined is not arriving. It's about watching the version of love you longed for dissolve in real time. So they begin to grieve in silence. They grieve the conversations they never get to have. They grieve the softness they keep offering that never comes back. They grieve the feeling of being chosen, not in words, but in emotional presence. They grieve the safety they wanted, the partnership they hoped for, they thought you were building together. At first, they don't call it grief. They just feel tired. They feel disappointed. They feel a strange emptiness after interactions that used to feel warm. They start noticing how often they're the one reaching out emotionally. They start realizing how many of their needs have been postponed, minimized, negotiated down into almost nothing, and then something painful happens. They start lowering their expectations, not as a strategy, more like surrender. They stop hoping you'll ask, "Are you okay?" They stop expecting you'll notice the sadness behind their smile. They stop believing that if they communicate more clearly, you'll suddenly become emotionally available. They may still love you, but love begins to share space with another truth, that they are alone inside the relationship. This is why the grief begins early, because the empath is not only grieving you, they are grieving themselves, the version of themselves that used to be open, playful, hopeful, the part of them that used to believe that love means being seen. They mourn the innocence of their own heart, and because they are sensitive, they often grieve in waves. Some days they feel close again, they feel tender again, they remember why they stayed. They see your good side and think, maybe it can still change. They give it another chance, they soften again, then the same pattern returns, the same dismissal, the same distance, the same emotional absence, and each time the cycle repeats, the grief deepens because it confirms what their body has already been whispering. This is not getting better. So they begin to detach while grieving. This is the confusing part for many partners. The empath can still say, "I love you," and mean it while also internally accepting this may not survive. They can still care and still be letting go. They can still want you and still feel the bond slipping away. Grieving while staying is what happens when the heart is forced to accept reality without yet having the permission to leave. Sometimes they stay because they fear hurting you. Sometimes they stay because they hope you'll finally understand. Sometimes they stay because their identity is tied to being loyal, being patient, being the one who doesn't give up. And sometimes they stay because leaving would mean facing a deeper wound, the old familiar pain of abandonment, rejection, or not being chosen. Pain that may have started long before this relationship. So they grieve quietly, alone. They might cry in the bathroom, then come out smiling. They might feel a lump in their throat during ordinary moments and swallow it down. They might lie next to you at night and feel something hollow, like they are sleeping beside a stranger who once felt like home. And slowly, they start doing something that looks like emotional preparation. And they imagine life without you, not to punish you, not to threaten you, but to calm their own nervous system. The mind starts rehearsing separation the way the body rehearses safety. It's a way of reducing shock, a way of building a bridge out of what feels unbearable. They start investing less emotionally. They still show up, but with less of themselves. They still care, but with a boundary around their heart. They still participate, but they stop offering the deepest parts. Because grief teaches a person to protect what's left. They may start noticing other kinds of support, friends, family, work, solitude. They may not say anything, but they're slowly building an inner life that doesn't depend on being emotionally met by you. Not because they want independence for its own sake, because their heart cannot survive on scarcity forever. This is why, when they finally leave, it can feel like it happened out of nowhere. But it didn't. It happened in all those silent nights when they reached for you emotionally and didn't find you. It happened in all those moments they decided not to share their feelings because they already knew the ending of that conversation. It happened in the small internal funerals they held, one expectation at a time. By the time they say the words, "I can't do this anymore," they are often not stepping into grief. They are stepping out of it because they have already cried the tears. They have already mourned the dream. They have already sat with the reality alone long enough that acceptance has replaced pleading. And that is why their goodbye can look calm. Not because they didn't love, but because the grieving started long before the leaving. They left you emotionally in pieces first, not to punish, but because staying fully present in a relationship that keeps wounding you eventually becomes a form of self-violence, and at some point, the empath chooses something they've postponed for too long, their own wholeness. In hand, they realize love should not require self-abandonment. They realize love should not require self-abandonment, not as an intellectual idea, but as a lived truth that finally becomes impossible to ignore. At first, self-abandonment doesn't feel like betrayal. It feels like being understanding. It feels like being patient, being mature, being the bigger person. It feels like love. They tell themselves it's okay, they've had a hard life. They say they don't know how to express emotions. They think, if I just love them a little better, they'll feel safe and they'll open up. And because they can feel other people deeply, they become experts at making excuses for pain. They can see the wound behind the behavior. They can sense the fear behind the anger, the shame behind the coldness, the helplessness behind the distance. So they adapt. They soften their voice. They choose safer words. They wait for the right time. They swallow needs and call it compromise. Slowly, almost invisibly, their inner world begins to shrink. They stop bringing up what bothers them. They stop naming the loneliness. They stop asking for reassurance. They stop expecting care to be offered without being demanded. Not because they don't have those needs, but because they've learned that expressing them comes with a cost. And the cost isn't always obvious. It might be an eye roll, a sigh, a sarcastic comment, a shift in mood that makes them feel guilty for even speaking, a sudden withdrawal of affection, a cold silence that lasts for hours or days. Over time, the message becomes clear in their body. Being honest will create tension. Needing will make me a burden. Having feelings will push them away. So they start performing a version of themselves that is easier to love, a version that asks less, a version that doesn't cry too much, a version that doesn't need too many talks, a version that stays calm, agreeable, emotionally low maintenance. And here's the tragedy: they often get rewarded for this version. The relationship feels smoother. The arguments reduce, the partner relaxes. The empath gets praised for being chill, understanding, strong, but inside something begins to hurt in a different way. Because peace that requires you to erase yourself is not peace. It's surrender, and eventually that surrender starts showing up as exhaustion. Not the kind of tiredness that sleep fixes, a deeper fatigue. The fatigue of living outside your own truth. The fatigue of constantly monitoring what you say, how you say it, how much you feel, whether your emotions will be too much for the room. When someone is abandoning themselves, the body often speaks first. They feel tight in the chest when they want to say something real. They feel heaviness when they think about another. Talk. They feel dread before coming home. They feel numb during intimacy. They feel like they're disappearing in their own life. And there comes a moment, sometimes quiet, sometimes sharp, when they finally see the pattern clearly. I am losing myself to keep this. That's the awakening, not dramatic, not cinematic, just a simple, devastating clarity. They realize that what they have been calling love has actually been a system where they are the one doing all the emotional labor. They are the one bending. They are the one apologizing for feelings. They are the one translating neglect into they're busy. They are the one accepting scraps of attention and calling it connection. And then they realize something even deeper, that the relationship has not only been painful because of what the other person does, but because of what they have been doing to themselves to survive it. Because every time they stayed silent when they needed to speak, they left themselves. Every time they ignored their own intuition, they left themselves. Every time they said, "Oh, it's fine," when it wasn't, they left themselves. Every time they accepted disrespect to avoid conflict, they left themselves. And the self that keeps getting left behind doesn't stop crying. It just gets quieter until it becomes depression, until it becomes anxiety, until it becomes numbness, until it becomes the inability to feel joy even when things seem okay. Then they begin to ask a new question, not how can I keep this relationship, but what am I becoming by staying? And that question changes everything, because they realize love is not supposed to be a place where you constantly abandon your needs to be accepted. Love is not supposed to require you to shrink so someone else can stay comfortable. Love is not supposed to punish honesty. Love is not supposed to make you feel guilty for being human. And when this realization finally lands in the body, not just the mind, something shifts. They stop chasing crumbs. They stop bargaining with basic decency. They stop confusing intensity with intimacy. They stop thinking patience means tolerating emotional starvation. They begin to understand that true love includes you, not just the parts of you that are convenient, the messy parts, the sensitive parts, the needy parts, the honest parts, the parts that ask for reassurance, for repair, for tenderness. And they realize if those parts are unwelcome here, then this isn't love, it's conditioning, it's old survival. Because many empaths learned early that love is earned by being easy, by being helpful, by being emotionally responsible for others, by not causing trouble, by not needing too much. So they grew up equating connection with self-sacrifice. But the adult heart eventually understands what the child couldn't afford to. That sacrificing yourself doesn't create love. It creates resentment, burnout, and emptiness. And once they see that clearly, they cannot unsee it. They can still have compassion for the other person. They can still understand their wounds. They can still wish them healing, but they can no longer offer their own life as the cost, because the deepest boundary is not, don't talk to me like that. The deepest boundary is, I will not abandon myself to stay connected to you. And when an empath reaches this point, they become very hard to manipulate, because they're no longer negotiating with fear. They're no longer negotiating with loneliness. They're no longer negotiating with the fantasy of what the relationship could be. They're choosing what's real. They're choosing their nervous system, their dignity, their inner stability. So yes, they realize love should not require self-abandonment. And when they truly realize it, not just understand it, that realization becomes a doorway. On one side is the old pattern, staying, shrinking, sacrificing, hoping. On the other side is something quieter but stronger, a life where love does not cost them their voice. A life where connection does not require betrayal of the self. A life where they can finally exhale and still be loved. The most dangerous moment in a relationship is not when an empath is angry, it is when they become quiet, because that silence is not empty. It is full of everything they tried to say and no longer will.